Welcome to Hudson RPO's podcast on racial equality and diversity. Hear from Hudson RPO leaders as they encourage organizations to just start on their D&I journey.
All right. Welcome back to Just Start. I am Jeremiah Stone and joined as always by Casey Butler and Gary Jones. And joining us today is Sarah George, our colleague from all the way over in EMEA, joining us virtually today. Thank you, Sarah, for joining the conversation. And wanted to just jump right in because, Sarah, you and I had a conversation a few weeks back about your interest in being part of the conversation. And we talked specifically about this concept of covering. And if you'll bear with me for just a second, I'm going to just share a definition for folks who might not be familiar with that concept. So Harvard Business Review defines covering as being a form of identity management where an individual downplays or disassociates from one of their identities. And just, this is something that is much more commonplace across the workplace. And is true of virtually every demographic. So there's really nobody who is exempt from covering within the workplace in some way. But Sarah, as I mentioned, this concept really resonated with you. So I just wanted to ask really quickly, why that was and how you came to that topic.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremiah. I will cover covering, pun totally intended, shortly.
Fit right in, Sarah. Fit right in.
I guess just really quickly, I just wanted to say quickly, I have a unique story because I was always the minority in every room growing up, or even in my adult years. So born in Malaysia, minority race in Malaysia. We moved to Australia. I was a minority race there. I'm Australian, and then I've moved to the UK. Also minority race, but not as evident here because there's a lot more people who look like me here. So I guess I have this story to cover from an EMEA side and also from an APAC side. So getting to covering, it was very interesting that I didn't even know what it meant. How it all came up was I was having a chat with, I was on a call with the HR manager in the US, Hudson US at the time. And there's a few of us on the call, and she talked about this awesome Just Start series. And I was introduced to Gary and Jeremiah and Casey. And she talked about how amazing it was to actually listen to real life stories. And then she turned to me in front of everyone on this call and said, "So Sarah, how did it feel when you had the opportunity to talk about your experience as a minority?" Pin drop silence. I couldn't say a word because I suddenly realized that I never had the platform to do it. Didn't have the opportunity. But more importantly, I didn't realize that in all those years, I was actually covering myself. So really hiding a part of me in order to fit in to society where I was the one who was different. I was the one who had a different accent or looked different. And so I would cover, and I did this for years. So it is quite amazing for me to be able to share this and really to raise awareness and say that it's actually endemic. You can have covering from people all over the world, as Jeremiah just said.
Mm-hmm. So Sarah, I was wondering, if you've been very generous to share your personal story and really appreciate you doing that. I'm gonna ask you to do that a little bit more here. As you reflect back on your experience up until this moment of discovery, are there things that you can sort of point to and say, like, that's a specific instance in which I was engaging in covering? So that's sort of question number one. And then maybe after that, we can talk about how has that changed things for you and how are you responding differently having discovered this concept and your engagement with it?
I don't think there was a specific time, a date on the calendar that I could say, oh, that's when things changed. That's when I stopped being, the gregarious person I was. And that's when I started being quiet and hiding and not showing myself. I think it was over a few years, it was little things that add up that if you don't actually talk about how that felt, or if you don't pull the person up on that behavior in a nice way, it tends to fester and it changes you as a person. So, I mean, I can think of just a couple right now on the fly, but there was one, years ago, agency recruitment, a long time ago. I won't say how long I've been in recruitment, but it was one of those agencies that you sat at your desk, you didn't get allowed a lunch break, you worked from 8 to 6, you ate at your desk. So I'd brought rice in a container, and I brought some form of protein in another container. I can't remember what it was. It might have been beef stir fry or something. I don't know. But I went to the microwave and I was heating up my jasmine rice, just jasmine rice on its own. And the manager comes storming over to our area and says, who's responsible for that stench? Get it out. And so I had to do this walk of shame, everyone watching me, to the kitchen, stop the microwave, get my rice, sit down and just be really quiet and eat my protein, my cold protein with this rice. And, it was little bits like that kind of, you don't say anything because you think, okay, well, that's the last time I'm going to do that. So I'll bring sandwiches in for the rest of my time here. So it just happens bit by bit. And I think now I would tell my younger self, that's not right. There are ways that you can handle that you could have said something in a nice way. Little things like when I first moved to Australia in school, people would say, Sarah George, how'd you get a white name like that? Today I would say, well, actually Sarah's a Hebrew name. But of course you instantly think, oh, I don't fit in. That difference is suddenly highlighted even more. And I think, Gary, you and I have spoken about this, where you're made to feel different at every stage. I'm sure you've had that experience as well.
Yeah, I can relate. I know, Sarah, it's amazing, but there are some times where I find myself making sure that I do something totally opposite of a stereotype of my race that's not even all that true. And you find yourself doing it, and it sucks, really, to be honest with you. I don't know if another word really it really puts you in an awkward place. And when you think about it, it's like, okay, after a long period of time, enough is enough, like you said, and you start to reflect and you start to say, this just isn't right. I should not be in this particular situation. Part of it is my fault, but part of it is obviously the culture and the environment around me, right? So we've all been there. And the white name, I've had that too. It's crazy. Gary Jones. When is Gary Jones a white name? Obviously there's more white people in the country than anyone else, right? So I'm sure there are more white people named Gary Jones than black, but why is it a white name? I just don't get it, right? My middle name is Michael. So again, it's just white. I guess my name should be LaMichael, it should be Octavius, Tavares, those types of things, right? But it's amazing how individuals take those things and make it white. When in reality, the white race doesn't own these things, right? It's like, It doesn't, this is something that a lot of people just, for some reason, or not, I shouldn't say a lot of people that I've had experience with, just seem to not understand. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling.
Would you agree that it's almost like we don't belong in this exclusive club?
Right. Exactly. Like, hey, what are you doing here? How did you get to, and it goes back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier in the podcast too, about, sounding white and those things. It's like, so, being able to have, great diction, being able to communicate well, all of a sudden is a white thing. It's crazy to even think that. So to your point, it's like, wow, how were you able to speak so well and become a part of this white culture? Right. And this isn't a white culture thing. This isn't about that. And to be honest with you, it's amazing how you would think that all black people sound a certain way, look a certain way, have names. So it's crazy how it becomes that way. But I agree with you, Sarah. It's almost part of an exclusive club that we're lucky to be in, or how in the world do we find ourselves here just by being us?
But when I hear the two of you talk, it's interesting because it seems like a lot of the covering is in response to stereotypes in some ways, right?
100%.
Like, you said, you talked about those names. I would say that stereotypically people might say that's, a black name, or, the whole thing about communicating clearly and effectively. People have stereotypes as to how they think other people of other races communicate, and that they aren't doing it that way. So it's interesting that it seems like both of your stories are linked with stereotypes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
so
I got
yeah.
the same, Gary. You know, I had the whole, well, how come you can speak English so well? You know, it's funny. I want to share. You know, my dad, who studied in Canada in the early '60s, so he's, you know, he looks like me, maybe darker skin than me. Even you can understand in the early '60s, he must have stood out like a foreign student, looks so different. You get people at the bus stop going, you know, who are you? Where are you from? Tell me about you. He was so exotic. I get that. You fast forward to me. I've had those experiences that I just said. But then what's really interesting and actually concerning is my niece. So this is 2 generations down. Is studying in Northern Ireland. She gets the question, how come you can speak English? Or are there cars in your country? It's incredible. So, you know, you're talking about 3 generations, and that question is still being asked today in 2021 without the actual sitting back and thinking, hey, how's this person gonna react? Now, of course, the best way, and I, you know, as I got more comfortable in my own skin, literally, I would say things like, oh yeah, well, you know what? I took a crash course and I learned it in 2 days. And then I'd have this big smile on my face, and people would then go, oh, okay, maybe that was a silly question, and yeah, all right, she's, you know, the joke's on me now. But at the time, those kind of comments would really sting. They'd really hurt. And so what I would do, my initial response is, after a lot of these incidents, is I would think, well, clearly everything I say is probably not going to be appreciated as much. So I'll be quiet. You know, in the meeting, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. I would be the quiet one. Because if I open my mouth, I'm going to sound different. Or whatever I've got is not going to be of enough value. Now, today, the Sarah George today is completely different. And I really want to say that, you know, I'm not trying to lay blame on anything. I just want to, you know, raise awareness and say to everyone, I'm trying to encourage understanding in these regions as well, you know, especially APAC, EMEA, encourage understanding and really say that there's such an opportunity today to make a difference, to take a step back. And think about what you're saying or what you're asking.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that because, look, I appreciate in the story that you're telling, you're sort of thinking about old Sarah, new Sarah, and your growth journey. And like, the reality is, like, old Sarah shouldn't have had to deal with that either, and shouldn't have had to feel like she needed to, you know, have a witty retort, or like, it just shouldn't have been something that she endured in the first place. And sorry, I'm referring to you in the third person here, but you shouldn't have had to endure that. So, you know, I do think that there's an important lesson here in terms of like those microaggressions and how those are really responsible for the covering. And we talked about this in our pre-discussion. Like, I think covering is a really important concept. I have a little bit of discomfort with it because to me it signals like you are doing the covering and it is your responsibility to uncover, whereas it's really the responsibility of the individual who sort of pushed you back into your shell to think about the behaviors that do that. And it is those microaggressions. It is coming with like, oh, something about you is weird and funny or unpleasant or it strikes me as odd. Like, those things are precisely the kind of thing that results in those kind of covering behaviors. And so ultimately it's not your responsibility, it is theirs.
Well, and I think
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and I think it's important for people to realize how some of the things that they say, then, you know, as they build up, or even could just be even one thing, how it could then impact your performance. Like, for you to share, to say, I didn't feel comfortable or to speak up because I was worried that my opinions wouldn't matter or my thoughts wouldn't be, you know, heard or appreciated. That in turn then affects your performance. So I think people have to really realize that, you know, it's bigger than just, you know, than having someone go into their shell. It really does impact their career development, growth, their own personal growth. I mean, I think we have to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, it impacts relationships as a whole as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does is it creates that guard, you know, and that covering experience, even when you're in an environment where people are open-minded and people accept everyone, but you don't know that because everything that you have experience has put you to this particular point. So you cover before you even really know someone, right? For instance, I'll give you an example. This was just a couple weeks ago. You know, I was out with a couple of friends having a couple of drinks, happy hour, whatever. And I went to the bar, and it was a long bar, and there was a lady sitting at one stool, and her purse was in the stool adjacent to her. And there was a little opening for me to come in and order my drink. And I'm thinking, oh no, I'm walking up and I'm right by this lady's purse, and I am concerned, really, to be honest with you, because, and again, nothing to this lady, right? She's done nothing to me, right? I don't even know her. She doesn't know me, but I'm already guarded that I don't want anything to happen to where she's going to think I'm going to be going through her purse or something's missing and things of that nature. So I don't take that spot, and I go around to the other side of the bar, longer line, who cares, right? For me, it was just better off for me to avoid a potential sticky situation based on the experiences that I have been through in my life, right? So covering really impacts relationships to come.
That's right.
Obviously, it certainly impacts the current situation, but it impacts the way those relationships are in the future. And that's the biggest, I think, hurdle. I don't know, Sarah, if you agree with me there, but that's the biggest hurdle is, I'm guarded now, even in an environment that's comfortable, or even with people that are there, like Jeremiah and Casey, you guys are very close to me, right?
Mhm.
But when I first came in, I'm not, and again, it's not in the front of my mind. Are you too racist? That's not what I'm thinking. But at the same time, I'm guarded because, people have judged me, just total basis of me being Black. And so, I'm cautious, and those are the types of things that really kind of hurt, from a relationship building standpoint. So.
You're looking for signals, right?
Yeah.
Like you're evaluating, like, and do I actually have psychological safety here? And look, I think a lot of companies say, like, we think you should bring your whole self to work, and like that phrase is just so tired to me, to be honest, because in part, like, you don't say that, you prove that, right? Like, people, if you want to create a space for people to be vulnerable, you need to create a space for people to be vulnerable, and they're going to be looking for signals. And microaggressions are a clear signal that this is not a safe space to be vulnerable. This is not a place where I can bring my whole self to work. And therefore, to Casey's point, people aren't going to bring everything that they have to that conversation.
Well, and interestingly enough, like even today, some of the leadership books, or, there's recommendations in there to, telling people that they need to cover, to be, to grow, to develop their career. I mean, even in some of these books that are written today, we're still seeing that in there. And that, I mean, it just amazes me that, and like you said, Sarah, you talked about your niece, like, how are we not further along? Like, how are we, and I mean, I know that's a big question. I know we often have those questions where, what are we going to do? Solve for those.
It's usually me posing them, Casey, so thank you.
You're welcome. But it amazes me that we're still behind. We're still so behind. And I hope for better. I hope, for your niece's kids and, further generations, that we can help, foster that change. But
it's true. Well, and that would be amazing, right? That's where we want to get to.
Mhm.
But it's great that people like Gary, myself, and others share this, because as Gary's story clearly showed, is that you're constantly on alert. You go to a group, if you go to a party or something, you think, oh, I don't know anyone. Are they, am I going to fit in? What do I have to do to fit in if I don't know anyone? Because I look so different. And I've always, very often been the only person who looks like me, the only person of color, the only person who's not from, and you've got to try harder. So the new Sarah, or the older Sarah, knows how to do that. Whereas the one who never talked about it, never accepted the whole covering piece, would just shy away.
And it must be so exhausting. Like,
it is
having to do that in every situation.
It's very exhausting. It's very exhausting. And, I did this in college with my friends, and it was something that was done again in a joking manner. Again, I wasn't as mature, but to Sarah's point, I am often going to places where, I'm going to be a rarity, right? As it relates to physical appearance, right? I'm going to mostly places that have many white people, and a lot of times I'm the only person in college. It was that way all the time. But if you do the reverse, typically speaking, the white person going to a black or all people of color type environment, they are not comfortable, and to the point where they don't want to do it at all, right? So it's like, I would recommend that people do that, right? Because here they are, they're now facing stereotypes, whether it's stereotypes that they're getting placed upon them or stereotypes that they're going into this place that they already have, right? This is what we do every day, every single day. And I would recommend that if you have an opportunity to do that, it's a great exploration. It's a self-exploration. I did that with my friends, and it was really something that they said, hey, you know what? You're right. Wow. You go through this every single day where you're the one person in a crowd that looks different, and everyone's battling stereotypes and elephants in the room that aren't being said, but everyone's on alert for different reasons, right?
It's interesting that you say that, Gary, actually, because I have a personal story. My husband, who is Caucasian, he grew up in an area, the high school that he went to, which was it was a very diverse area. To be honest, he was in the minority at his high school. And he has such a different perspective, I think, because of that. Than people who, like, for example, I grew up in a town where unfortunately it wasn't very diverse, but his perspective is just so different and refreshing, to be honest, because he's been in that situation. He had been in that situation, and it's still different because, I mean, there's a lot of privilege to being, a white male, but, unfortunately, but he has a totally different perspective that now he's able to share with our child. And, I think you're right. I think that was so valuable for him, and he didn't know any different, really. I mean, because that's just where he grew up.
Right.
But it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah.
And
sorry about the color show from my side. Literally, this is London for you. So 1 minute it's sunny and I'm sitting here and you can see me, and the next minute clouds cover. Sorry about that.
Clouds are covering you, Sarah. Yeah. This is.
You can't make this stuff up, can you?
This is the most meta session ever. Well, look, I do want to.
Reverse that. Reverse that.
No, we didn't.
Well, just in wrap up here, like I do want to just highlight that point that both all of you have now made, just around like empathizing with people who are not necessarily hiding something, but hesitant to show something until it's been demonstrated that they are safe to do that. And what are you doing to signal that you are open to that? And part of maybe that journey is enduring that discomfort of truly engaging in radical empathy by placing yourself in spaces where you are not the majority, where you are facing some discomfort around being in a situation that you might not otherwise be in, and understand that is a situation that others that you are encountering are dealing with on a daily basis. And I think that kind of radical empathy can help you to be better around avoiding the kind of behaviors and microaggressions that result in people engaging in entrenched covering behaviors. So good discussion as always. I'm so grateful to you, Sarah, for coming on and sharing your story. Gary, Casey, as always, it's been a pleasure, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, folks.
To speak with any of today's participants about your Just Start journey, email juststart@hudsonrpo.com.